This is Dr. Bob Breyer, and I've read a couple of his books, an audio course that he does. It's like a university-level series of lectures on the history of ancient Egypt. He is kind of a famous Egyptologist. His nickname is Mr. Mummy, and you'll see why in a minute. I might have told you last week, but you'll see why in a minute. Here, we went over this last week. This is his overall take. He's not a Christian. This is his overall take as an Egyptologist on the story of Joseph as it's written in the Bible. His overall take is that the story of Joseph was clearly written by someone who knew Egypt in that time period. Clearly written by someone who knew Egypt. Now, we went over a couple pieces last week. Here's a couple interesting pieces, and we'll come back to some of these as we go through the message. But things that are connections between ancient Egyptian history and what we find in the story of Joseph in the Bible. This one is really interesting. It's the word abrek. And this word appears in the Hebrew text. It appears in the section where, you remember the story of Joseph, and Pharaoh gives him power over all of Egypt, and then he goes around collecting grain, and then because it's 7 years of plenty, and then it's 7 years of famine, and he goes around giving out the grain. Well, as he goes around Egypt with all of Pharaoh's stuff, this ring, Pharaoh's signet ring, a robe, a chariot, all the Egyptian people bow down before him, and they cry out, abrek. Now, it's a really interesting word because it's not Hebrew. And the question is, what in the world is it? And most Egyptologists think that it's a slight variation on an Egyptian phrase, an ancient Egyptian phrase that means your heart to you. It's sort of like saying, God bless you, or, vaya con Dios, right? Like, go with God. And so this is real Egyptian that is recorded in Genesis, that the Egyptian people were crying out to Joseph as he went around. The Egyptians believed that you thought with your heart. What we think happens in your brain, they thought happened in your heart to you. Amazing. Another really interesting connection in the text, this one is fascinating to me. So you know the scene, we'll go through it today, where Joseph is in front of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's guys, Pharaoh has had these dreams, and no one can interpret them. No one knows what the dreams mean. Well, it says when he calls these people, actually it's before Joseph gets there, when he calls all of his wise men to interpret his dreams, the Hebrew text calls them magicians. Okay, he calls all of his magicians to interpret his dream. And that's a fairly accurate depiction because the ancient Egyptians believed in magic, like they really believed in magic. Everything was magic spells to them. Well, the Coptic text does not say magicians. So what does that mean? Coptic is actually the modern form after ancient Egyptian, right? Languages keep changing a little bit, but it eventually became called Coptic, right? Coptic is the modern form of ancient Egyptian. And there is an ancient translation of the Hebrew text into Coptic. And in just that part in the text, it doesn't say magicians. It says in Coptic, the scribes of the house of life. Why? Most Egyptologists, Bob Breyer thinks it's because the Coptics, being Egyptians, they knew who Pharaoh really called. He called a particular group of priests, and they corrected it. It's not just magicians. He called the scribes of the house of life, a particular group of priests who were trained in dream interpretation. That's stunning. Stunning. Here's another amazing little connection, archaeology. This is on I don't know how to say it, Sehel Island or Sehel Island. And this is the very famous famine stela. So it is a carving into the rock. This island is, it's near Aswan, so it's way upstream in the Nile, like on the very borders of Egypt. And it records, in the Bronze Age, a 7-year famine. Does that sound familiar? In the whole land of Egypt, a 7-year famine. And it's very unusual because Egyptians almost never recorded bad news. Almost never. And so it seems like in some way this must have actually been good news. How could a 7-year famine be good news? Maybe if Pharaoh had enough grain to feed everybody, and then he became ultra powerful as a result. Amazing. And this is the last piece of archaeology and Joseph for today. And this you're going to see. How long does it take to make a mummy? 40 days or 70 days. So this was a big debate for a long time in Egyptology because there are ancient sources that say it took the Egyptians 40 days to mummify someone. And there are also ancient sources that say it took them 70 days to mummify someone. So how long did it really take? So you know Egyptian mummies. I mean, they're a little gruesome. I won't give you the most gruesome pictures. This is the most famous mummy in the world. Who do you think this is? This is Tutankhamun. This is his mummy. It's a little bit closer picture. It's amazing. I mean, it's a little gruesome, but you can actually still get a sense of what he looked like. Their mummification process was intense. There's tons of Egyptian mummies. This is the most famous mummy because it was found undisturbed, and he's a pharaoh. But there are hundreds and hundreds of ancient Egyptian mummies. Here's another one that's from an official, but not a pharaoh. Some of them are very well preserved. Look at that thing. We're talking about thousands of years old. They're amazing. How long did it take to make a mummy? So Bob Breyer, in 1994, Bob Breyer and Ron Wade made a mummy in the Egyptian way, for real. They got a body, a cadaver, that had been donated to science. And so this guy is like a surgeon, and Bob Breyer's an Egyptologist, and they mummified it using the Egyptian process. And they learned all kinds of things as they did that. And one of the things they learned is it takes 40 days to make a mummy, not 70. So what were the other 30 days for? Here's what it says in Genesis 50. Did you know Jacob, Joseph's dad, was mummified? He was mummified like this. Jacob, look at Genesis 50. Joseph directed the physicians. At this point, he is a high official in Egypt, the highest official. Joseph directed the physicians in his service to embalm his father Israel. That's Jacob. They're going to mummify Jacob. The physicians embalmed him. Why? He did this so that he could take his dad back to Canaan and bury him with Abraham and Isaac, and the body wouldn't decay on the way. Taking a full 40 days. For that was the time required for the embalming. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. Why do the ancient sources, why are they all confused about 40 days or 70 days? Genesis 50 gives the answer. It took 40 days to make a mummy, but the whole process, the whole funeral service, and all of the different things that they did to mourn for the dead person took 70 days. And that's why there's a debate in the sources. Genesis is right.